autism spectrum disorders. For example, in autism, it's 4 boys to every girl gets the disease. And when you get to something less sensitive, like less dramatic, such as Asperger's, it's 8 boys to every girl. And if you go to attention deficit hyperactive disorder, again, more boys than girls. To me, these are all the cause. They're all different responses to mercury exposure at different ages and probably different genetics. But these are mercury-associated diseases of children. Now, you wonder, why is it boys more than girls? And so we did a study with the neurons in culture. And I did this with Dr. Mark Lovell, who's an expert in growing neurons in culture in my department. We came up with the idea that we would see what's the effect of estrogen versus testosterone on the lethality with and without thimerosal present. And what we found is that as we increase the estradiol levels in our cultures, the thimerosal, we could actually keep thimerosal from killing neurons in culture. That would kill, say, 80% of them in 24 hours. However, when we added testosterone, the rate of killing was dramatically enhanced. And this fits into the finding by a Dr. Baron Cohen in the Royal Hospital, I think, in London. And what he showed is that when he looked at the amniotic fluid of children, of mothers who gave birth to autistic children, the one difference he found was that they had significantly high testosterone levels. So these children are born with high testosterone levels, and before they're even dried, they're given a vaccination against hepatitis B, and their testosterone levels can dramatically affect the toxicity of this thimerosal. And the studies today, at this meeting we're at today, Autism 1 in 2005, there are people pointing out these autistic boys and girls have very high testosterone levels. So you have a susceptibility. Testosterone by itself will do very little to you, but when you expose them to thimerosal or other forms of mercury, they can have major problems. It's a tremendous enhancement of the toxicity to have thimerosal and testosterone together.
I can't remember exactly, but did you ever do anything with measles virus on the...
No, that's Dr. Wakefield did that. But Dr. Wakefield, and somebody might say, he had the measles virus hypothesis, and I had the thimerosal hypothesis. And he was in this business before I was. He was one of the only... And Andy and I have no fight. We really don't. Both of us had hypotheses. And his hypothesis was based on the measles because he found a lot of measles viral nucleic acid in the guts of these children. Well, think about it. You take a child in the United States, you got 3 thimerosal containing vaccines on the same day you got the MMR. The MMR doesn't contain any thimerosal. So you inhibit phagocytosis, so your macrophages can't pick up that measles virus that's floating around in your body, and it can get into cells and start replicating on its own and cause its own set of problems that are associated with autism. So I think the exposure to mercury can kind of set these kids up for a measles infection from the attenuated measles virus given in the MMR vaccine. So I think all of this needs to be elucidated and studied, but it's something you wouldn't be surprised if it happened. As a matter of fact, you would be surprised if it didn't. The studies that we did on the mercury in the birth hair of autistic children versus controlled children, and I should point out what that was, is that we showed that controlled children had higher levels of mercury in their hair based on higher exposures from the mother having more dental amalgam fillings in their mouth. And it went up exactly like you would expect. But the autistic children, so if we go to the very end, the extreme, the mothers that had greater than 10 amalgam fillings, and if you take the children that were normal, they would have 12 times more mercury in their hair than the autistic children who had 10 or more amalgam fillings. And what this tells us, without being too complex, is that the autistic children cannot excrete mercury effectively. And that's the big difference. Now, it's kind of counterintuitive because the old-time toxicologists that are out of date, would say, well, the higher the level of mercury in your hair, the more mercury you are exposed to. And that's totally wrong at low-level exposures. Totally wrong. Because if it goes into your body and it isn't excreted back out into your bloodstream to be removed by the urine and feces routes, then it's not going to get in your hair. And so the more you retain, the less will be in your hair. And that's been held up. If you go back and look at all these old studies, there were these conundrums why children with the higher mercury levels that eat fish a lot were smarter than the kids with the lower mercury hair levels. Or the kids that had the lower blood mercury levels in their blood had more heart problems than the kids that had a lot of mercury in their blood eating the same background diets. And what it is, the ones with the levels in the excretory pathway were getting rid of the mercury. The others were retaining it and becoming more ill.
So that could have been, so the misinterpretation would be that mercury is somehow protecting and helping these kids
Yes.
be smarter.
The American Dental Association spokespeople have used that very often, saying, well, in the Shields Island study, the kids with the highest mercury level in their birth hair were the smarter ones, therefore a little bit of mercury is good for you. You couldn't replicate that in any animal study. The more mercury you gave them, the dumber the rats got. But they did that because they didn't sit down and think, or they didn't want to find a problem.
One thing that frustrates me a bit with the emphasis on genetics versus environmental, even though environmental is being looked at more, is there such thing as a human genetic code that is not affected by mercury when they're given enough? And
No, of course not. Mercury is toxic to every biological system that it's exposed to. And what I tell people, when you look at an autistic child that's been exposed to thimerosal, you're looking at someone that's really a biochemical train wreck. And you can go all the way through. We can talk about the depolymerization of tubulin, the suppression of the immune system, decreased methylation of their DNA and RNA. These kids have a myriad of problems. There isn't one biochemical system that I know of that wouldn't be effectively inhibited by mercury at very low concentrations. So when you start looking at these kids and you say, well, this problem causes it, or this, what problem don't they have? I mean, they have digestive problems, they have neurological problems, they have immune problems. Anywhere you look in an autistic child, you're going to find that the biochemistry is not normal. They don't have normal metal levels. They keep a lot of different heavy metals. They can't excrete them anymore. So there's just no explanation for this to say that mercury should be in medicine or dentistry or exposed to a human being at all. We need to get all the mercury out. And to sit there and argue, well, this little bit of mercury isn't toxic, or please let us put in. I mean, I testified in front of the Connecticut committee in the Department on Environmental Protection yesterday. And the arguments there, with people are saying, look, mercury's coming out, we have mercury, we can't eat mercury in a fish. And so what they were saying, please come here and tell us that, amalgams that we put in our mouth put mercury in our body, which we flush down the toilet sooner or later, and it gets into the sewage treatment plant, and it's going out and it's getting into the fish, and it's rendering those fish too toxic for us to eat. Is that right? That's the question they were asking. Well, what about that mercury going into your body on the first route? I mean, that's a ridiculous situation. And then it gets more stupid when you're sitting there and you're testifying, no, here's an amalgam, this is a mercury vapor sniffer, you hold it in front of it, it shows the mercury coming off. That's not a question that you have to bring somebody in from the University of Kentucky to tell somebody in Connecticut. They know that. And so there's no doubt about the contamination of the environment by dental amalgams. And yet the Connecticut Dental Association, and supported by the American Dental Association, got up after I spoke and made the argument that, in essence, if I can be sarcastic, was, but we're dentists and we really, really have the right to intoxicate people if we want to with mercury. Because the legislature didn't have the intent of excluding amalgam fillings or dressing dentistry when they said we don't want materials put in Connecticut, manufactured in Connecticut, that increase our mercury exposure. But exclude us dentists, we have a right to make you toxic. I mean, it doesn't speak very highly of the bureaucracy that runs American dentistry. As a matter of fact, I think I would say what they're doing is absolutely criminal in my mind. Because if you look who has autistic children, these people are doctors, lawyers, dentists, scientists, prime business people. The mercury doesn't have anything to do with bad genetics. When we evolved on the face of the earth, with our knuckles dragging the ground, we drank bad water and we ate bad food. So 2/3 of the metal protection that our body has against heavy metals is in our intestines. We're not supposed to breathe mercury vapors from dental amalgams. We didn't evolve breathing mercury vapor, and we didn't evolve having ethyl mercury injected into our arms and legs. And so this is not a genetic weakness. It's a susceptibility that can flow. I mean, if you're ill, if you're on antibiotics, you're going to be more susceptible to mercury toxicity. This is not bad genetics. I mean, these are very bright people. These are very capable and accomplished people.
The predispositions to mercury toxicity are other exposures combined. Is that?
That's a big part of it, but it's not a genetic mutation. It's not a genetic weakness. It is just genetics that are different. And it's like, for example, a good example are Eskimos. You give them a beer or alcohol, they can't detox that alcohol. Because they were raised in the north, they didn't drink corn or drinks made of corn or wheat or anything like that. So they didn't develop the genetics to take care of it. But I certainly wouldn't want to be compared with one of them in surviving in the North Pole, eating whale blubber and seals. So they're genetically different, but it's not a mutation, and it's not a disease of any sort. I mean, susceptibilities are just a fact of life. All of us have certain weaknesses, towards certain elements that we're eating. A person susceptible to mercury may not be nearly as susceptible to, say, some other toxin like a pesticide or something. So to say that this is the parents' fault is just angers me more than anything else. It's the fault of the people who sat there after the report came out from the Toronto hospital in '77 showing that 10 kids of 13 died after having thimerosal topically applied to their infected umbilical cord, and they reported that. And then they took thimerosal, they took mercurochrome and merthiolate, the red stuff they used to plant on. They took it off the market because it was too toxic. And then some of these Einsteins on the CDC and the vaccine board decided it was then a good idea to leave that same thimerosal and inject it into a day-old baby at a level that would only be safe if the baby weighed 275 pounds. So you have to say, if there's a mutation, if there's a problem that is a weakness, it's in the IQ of the people who run the CDC.
Ability in kids.
Well, I don't think they did. The EPA standard is 1/10 of a microgram per kilogram body weight. But that was decided on children, adolescent children, not babies, not infants less than 6 months old, but adolescents that ate fish in the Seychelles and Faroe Island studies. Now, you're eating fish, you're eating mercury that's already been in a living organism tied up with things that would render it biologically not toxic, such as selenium, or binding it with cysteine or glutathione, similar molecules in the fish. So most of it goes straight through your body and is not retained. That's the reason I say fish is not as toxic as mercury is not as toxic. And so that's how it was decided. And then you take it down through your intestines. 2/3 of the metallothionein, which binds and removes heavy metals, are located in your intestines because, like I say, we evolved eating bad food that was contaminated. And so